Alright, rebels. So you ignored my advice, and now you have a million plot threads, and you need to tie them all together and resolve this thing. This thing called a story. What do? You've already started on your comic. It's too late to turn around. I mean, it's not actually too late, but it's too late, darn it. Like, what do? How are you supposed to do this thing called tying plots together? And even if you haven't added a million, there's still some advice. You're still going to have a certain amount of plot threads that you need to tie together. So let's talk about this. How do you end something with multiple plot lines in a satisfying way? And then after this video will be my last video on ending things. It's going to be about plot twists. It's going to be terrible because I've completely run out of steam on this challenge. But there's 10 more left for me, 10 more for Ursula, and then additional live streams, and we're done. We're free. And my brain can recover from this long challenge. Endings. You probably know how to end at this point. You know, once you know how to begin a story, you basically know how to end a story. It's like within you. You just need to practice it. And I've already talked about structuring large casts and how it's a terrible idea, and also some tips on how to do it. So I definitely look at that first and foremost before even considering how you're going to end it. And if you have those two things in mind, like endings in general and large casts in general, it's gonna be mostly smooth sailing for you, like aside from the treacherous seas of having a large cast in general. But otherwise, you're gonna be okay. Like I've said repeatedly, when it comes to working with a large cast, it kind of comes down to bringing all your major plot turns together into like little satisfying clumps. You try and overlap things, have them happen as close together as possible. And yeah, that's the basics of how to do that. And in the case of an ending, what else do you got to do? You got to bring everyone together for the climax. The climax is your big turning point. You want everyone's climax to kind of occur around the same point. You want the same elements of the climax occurring around the same point. Obviously, for your villain, the low point is actually kind of reversed, where it's like a super high point for them before they get their low point. It's you know that thing is going to line up a little differently, but for the most part, you want everyone to be succeeding around the same points, everyone to be failing around the same points. It just will add impact to whatever you're working on. And basically, yeah, you want to overlap elements, you want to bring themes together, break characters up into groups with specific tasks, and reunite groups together that have been apart for a while, where the interactions will be valuable to ending your story. And plan, outline. Be sure you know where everyone is going and what their tasks are, and you will have the super smoothest that you possibly can ending to your large story. When it comes to writing endings for very large stories, not simply like the end of a large volume, like the actual end, the very, very end of multiple volumes. Like, things can get out of hand very quickly for you, and I'm not entirely talking about the climax part anymore, though it does apply to that and all other aspects of writing a larger series. But what I'm talking about is that resolution tends to get bloaty and just large and over encumbered, and I think I need to go into this a little bit because it's just a little side that is applicable in all sorts of stories, but definitely very applicable if you have multiple plot points, plot graphs, whatever going on. And I think the best example of things getting a little bloaty is like Return of the King, Lord of the Rings. Like, that ending seems to go on forever. I honestly think the ending's fine for it. It does feel like some could be like cut, but also it doesn't, you know. But that feeling of dragging, or a feeling of abruptness on the other end of the spectrum, you want to try and avoid that. And here's a little advice on how to do that. So regardless of what you settle on, you're going to have to settle on which resolutions you are going to show, and which are going to be left behind for kind of readers' interpretation. And obviously, you're going to want to show the ending of your main character, where they end up going from there, a little hint, leave it a little vague. You don't want to explain everything. But what about the other characters? How do you choose between your 70 million characters? Well, I think that the best way to think of this is kind of thinking of your plot threads as like actual threads that you have together, and some are smaller and that get tied up in the middle of your story, but you're going to have these long threads that go for the entire length, and so they get knotted up around the inciting incident, and then once again they will get knotted up together during the climax. And on either side you're going to have little loose threads, like your hoodie when it frays and you tie it, and you have like the loose little thread bits. Those threads are what you need to kind of pay attention to, because in the very introduction of your story, you're going to have a lot of these, and these are the ones that you want to pay a special interest to when you're writing your endings, okay? So while there are exceptions, when you're looking at these, they're most likely going to include some fallout from the climax. Fallout from the climax or the midpoint or anything like that will be resolved fairly quickly. It won't be the last thing that's resolved. It might be a little breather scene after the big climax. But either way, after that, you're going to have to look at what you introduced, and you're going to have a reflection of that, an ending. A lot of your internal arcs matter far less and may be fine to kind of leave after the finale itself. Like if you have a character that's kind of tertiary, that's introduced in the middle, like they don't need a big definitive large scene at the end of your story to show where they are going, what happened with them. Leave that to imagination. What is brought up at the beginning, though, that is important. And you want to establish how the new status quo is, basically. Because the introduction is establishing the current status quo, and then the ending will be establishing your new status quo. It's giving a glimpse to your readers of like what is going on. And not every arc ends with a bow. Like it's okay to leave questions, and you get to kind of bridge the line between intriguing and frustrating, making sure you address all of the promises that you made up front. And that goes along with kind of the setup and payoff thing that I've been talking about. Payoff is everything that you have promised, and you want to make sure that everything that got set up got paid off, and going forward, everything's okay. So just make sure to look at your introduction to kind of see what the major promises of your story are before ending them and forgetting to address them. And yeah, that's my advice on writing multiple plots and ending them nicely together. I hope that helped out. Fado is over here. Fado got stung by a bug last night because we're not allowed to have a good time apparently, and his whole face swelled up. So poor puppy. We had to go to like an ER vet because he did it. He had the audacity of getting bit at 10 o'clock right before we were about to go to bed. So we came home at like 12, and then I was in bed by 1 o'clock. Ugh. And my wallet's sad. Ugh. What is the past few days? That's my question. Leave your answers in the comments below. I'll see you guys next time. There's like less than a month left, guys. We're so close.